The name Elizabeth Fry is synonymous with prison reform in the 19th century, but most of us probably don't know what those reforms entailed. So in this section, we're going to look a little more closely at her life's work. A good place to start is May of 1801. Elizabeth had met the Quaker Joseph Lancaster, who developed a practical method of educating poorer children. His method involved dividing the children into groups of 12, with a monitor in charge of each group to keep order. Older children teaching the younger children once they had learned the lessons themselves. These Lancaster schools became very widespread in the decades that followed. And Elizabeth appreciated this method, having experience of teaching a class of 70 herself, so she was inspired to use it in her subsequent work in prisons. In 1813, Stephen Grellet, French-born American Quaker missionary, asked for and received a permit to visit all the prisons. He visited the women prisoners in Newgate. Immediately afterwards, he went to Elizabeth Fry's house and he told her of the miserable conditions of the women and of the children who were naked and freezing. At this time, early in her marriage, she'd already started visiting and helping individuals in some of the poorer neighbourhoods and had been appointed as a workhouse visitor by her meeting. So she immediately ordered material, got together a group of women and sewed clothes for the children. And then she went to Newgate Prison with her sister-in-law, Anna Buxton, taking the new clothing with them to meet with the women prisoners and to clothe the children. In January of 1817, 4 years after her first visit, Elizabeth Fry found herself with greater domestic freedom, and this allowed her to engage in more charitable work. She got a permit to visit Newgate and worked out a plan. She wanted to establish a school there for the children and the young criminals. She discussed it with the women prisoners, and they decided amongst themselves who was to be the instructor for the young people. She got the prison authorities to agree to the school and the use of one room, and she supplied old school books herself. It began with 30 pupils, but many of the other women prisoners clamoured to be taught themselves. Elizabeth was concerned that the jailers were allowing male prisoners into the women's prison at night, and when she talked to these women, they told her that they just wanted to learn to read and sew, and they wanted to work. So she assembled a committee, mostly of Quakers, to form a Ladies' Newgate Committee. They arranged to get materials for sewing, and between them they would oversee the women's work and instructions. The women prisoners themselves would work and be instructed in groups of up to 12, and they would appoint one of their own as a monitor in each group. The ladies' committee would appoint a woman to act as matron in the prison and would pay her wages. The women prisoners would have to abide by voluntary rules to behave themselves reasonably. The women would make patchwork quilts, and Elizabeth arranged a market for these products. Most of the proceeds were kept until the women were released or transported. But as an incentive, a shop was established, which stocked tea and sugar and small items for prisoners to buy, thus giving them immediate benefits for their work and good behaviour. And she got all of this agreed to by the prison authorities, and it transformed the prisoners quite quickly. When some of the prisoners were due to be transported to Australia, Elizabeth learned of the terrible conditions on the convict ships, and she tackled this too. She got the prisoners into small groups with monitors for instructions, and she gave each of them materials for the journey to make patchwork quilts and a Bible for them to read. She did this for all the ships transporting women prisoners until she died. She promoted regulations that improved conditions for them. She asked about conditions when they arrived in Australia, and it led to a barracks being built to house them until work could be found. Eventually, transportation became very unpopular following the publication of a government report in 1837, and after some years the practice was ended. So, from the poor neighbourhoods of London to the penal colonies of Australia, Elizabeth Fry's Quaker faith had a lasting impact on many desperate and otherwise forgotten lives.